Hi, my name's Zoe Laycock, and today I'm really excited to be talking to Stefania Chaplin, also known as DevSecOps.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Zoe, and really looking forward to being here. So, hi everyone, I'm Stefania Chaplin, aka DevSecOps. I spent the last 10 years working across different security companies, talking to loads of different organizations, did a bit of experience as a developer as well. Now I've pivoted, so I'm working as an executive coach, empowering women, but I really keep on top of the security space. It's something I'm very interested and passionate about.
So let's dive right into it. What is DevSecOps and how does it differ from traditional DevOps?
Great question, Zoe. So, when we think about the traditional DevOps lifecycle, hopefully one of the things that comes to mind is the loop of the processes between developers and between operations. And if we take a step back and think where we've come from, if we look, previously there was the waterfall methodology, and that was very much sequential. So, whilst with the DevOps loop, what we're aiming for is this fast and continuous feedback. So, if there is a problem in production, it can be fixed very quickly, whether that's by operations or via developers as well. One thing that DevOps omitted was the security. In traditional DevOps, you might have some security between where developers hand over, maybe a release candidate security, or maybe before operations put the release candidate in production. But what you're missing out on is security at every stage. So, for example, in DevSecOps, within plan stage, we might have threat modeling. For the developers, whilst they're coding, we would have integrated security scanning in the IDE so that they can fix their vulnerabilities as they create them rather than having to wait until they're in production, or worse. So, really, what we have is this focus on continuous security testing, monitoring, and feedback. And two phrases that probably come up quite a lot are shift left, which is when you're shifting your security process to the left, and also shield right, which is when you're defending your operational processes and production via security as well.
So how does the concept of shift left in DevSecOps actually impact software testing and particularly unit testing?
Cool. So yes, as I mentioned, with shift left, the whole emphasis, as the name described, is shifting security processes left within the DevOps and DevSecOps workflow. So this is really about the developer process. So what it will do is having security tests integrated into the earlier stages of the development cycle. So this could be as well integrating security testing alongside unit testing and identifying vulnerabilities sooner. So this reduces the time and cost of fixes. As I mentioned, it's a lot cheaper to fix a vulnerability, within an IDE versus fixing it in production or when it's been out in the market or with customers and if a breach happens. So this is where the real shift left approach comes into, vulnerabilities quicker, cheaper to fix. And also what you want to do is you really want to automate these tests. So whether it's your security testing, whether you're automating your unit tests, you really want to do this to provide continuous feedback on these security risks.
So in terms of automation, which you just mentioned, what role does it play in DevSecOps, especially in relation to unit testing?
I think this is a great question. And I remember when I first started my career in security, I was working at a security vendor and we had this slide deck. And on the last page, it had a quote from Forrester, so, Gartner, Forrester, saying manual processes are doomed to fail. So that's a bit of a morose way of framing it. But actually, if we think about what automation allows, so automation enables, consistency. It's repeatable. It reduces manual intervention. And a lot of the time, what automation is doing is stuff that humans, we don't really want to do anyway. If you can imagine, if you had to manually do your unit test and run it for every single iteration of your product, for every single unit, for every feature, that would become quite cumbersome. And most developers, very creative, very intelligent, and want to focus on things that are more I say more enjoyable, things that require more lateral thinking rather than specifically unit testing or security testing. So with automation, consistency, faster, it increases the testing speed and efficiency, and it also enables continuous security checks alongside the development processes.
So, if we take the concept of security as code, can you explain the relevance of it to DevSecOps?
Yeah, this is another great question, and it's similar a bit to automation, the automation in terms of if you were to look at the two extremes. So we had automation and manual processes. So security as code is let's write down and let's version control and let's really think about whether it's our security policies, whether it's our security configurations. Let's make them auditable and scalable and consistent. So that's the as code. The opposite is let's not do that. So that might be a case of whether it's in someone's heads or in someone's IDE somewhere, or every single project has a totally different approach. So really where we have this security as code, it's similar to infrastructure as code. It's similar to policy, well, includes policy as code. And it's really about, treating whether it's policy or configurations, treating it as code, version controlled, auditable, scalability. You have consistency in applying these security measures, which especially within enterprise organizations, especially if you're dealing with, personal data, credit cards, health data, you really need to focus on this compliance and security angles. And it also makes it easier to integrate security checks into automated CI/CD pipelines as well.
So, what are some of the common challenges that engineering organizations might face when implementing DevSecOps, and how easy or not are they to overcome?
That's a really great question, because so far what we've been talking about has been very, technical focused. We've talked about testing, we've talked about security, automation, security as codes. But what we find within organizations, so I worked with a huge range of enterprise organizations in my career, and actually the biggest challenge is usually to do with people. It's how do we drive behavioral change? How do we increase adoption of whether it's a policy, a tool, a process? When you're within an organization, sometimes you can have that, well, this is, the best way to do things. But sometimes there can be, whether it's cultural resistance, whether it's, uncertainty, a lot of people can be resistant to change. And it is quite a shift of taking, okay, security as an afterthought, as an after process, and now it's no, we need every stage to be secure, and we need every person to think from a security perspective to make sure, are we validating our input? Who or what has access to our data? Is this the best and safest way we can do this? So there's a real element on the people and the cultural, and how do we drive behavioral change? So I think that can be quite a common challenge. How do we change process? And that's not even specific to security. That's more of an organizational problem. But I think that does come up a lot. The other area, so that's on the kind of cultural side. Sometimes there can be a skills gap. So for example, what you might have had is one security for every 100 developers. Maybe maybe got some security champions teams. That's awesome, and that's a great way of spreading knowledge within development teams. But what you can face sometimes is skill gaps in this security knowledge amongst the development teams. So depending on how siloed your organization is, how security is perceived. Is security kind of the bad person saying, no, you do not pass go, do not deploy, do not collect 200 pounds? Or is security seen as a positive, as a safety precaution? Like, let's stay compliant, let's keep our jobs and not get hacked. So really what you want to try and do is you want to try and foster collaboration between these silos. You want to give people a shared goal. This is why we're doing it. This is why we're changing. You want to provide training, and where you can, automate these security practices to make everyone's life easier as well.
So, what tools are commonly used in DevSecOps for security testing, and how do they integrate with CI/CD pipelines?
Cool. This is another great question, and I'm going to focus, as you've asked, mainly on the CI/CD pipelines. But just as a reminder, within DevSecOps, it really is from inception, from when we have an idea and we're in the plan stage. For example, yeah, let's make our login page. Let's make sure that it has no access for different cross-site scripting or SQL injection, etc. All the way to protecting patch management in production, and making sure that we have an instant response team. So there is a whole area of DevSecOps, but focusing more on the security testing. So there's a number of different types of security testing. So for example, there is developers write code. And so you might want to check the quality of that code. So for example, you have, we call it static code analysis. That is looking at the code that has been written. Some examples of these can be, you have tools like kind of check marks, Sneak. You have OWASP tools as well. And these can look at your static code. You can also have your dependencies. So for example, developers will use pieces of open source software. Some little things, if you've ever heard of left pad gates, some little things, all they'll do is move items around. Sometimes it's to do with logging frameworks, so Log4j. And so there's also the dependency scanning. And then also dynamic application security testing. So great, instead of looking at the code, we have our application now. Now let's have a look at this and see see how vulnerable it is, whether it's via different API calls or HTTP calls, etc. So what you want to try and do with your CI/CD pipeline is you want to integrate these different types of tools. So whether it's static code analysis, dependency scanning, or dynamic application security testing, you want to seamlessly integrate it into your CI/CD pipeline so that you can automate the vulnerability scanning. And I think one of the other key points is making sure that you have your scanning. For one, it doesn't take too long, but also you have the results that you can then give to the developers, and you give it to them in a developer-friendly speak. It's not that helpful if you just start chucking entries from the National Vulnerabilities Database and say, oh, you're vulnerable to CVE 2023 123B, because most developers, when they read that, might not understand what that means. But if you say to them, oh, your login page, you have an element of cross-site scripting within the front end, developers will actually understand that a lot better. So as well as having this security testing and integrating it within your CI/CD pipeline, it's very much about giving your developers results that they can then action and iterate quickly. Because the worst case scenario is, oh, you scan, you find a vulnerability, and it's 3 months before anyone looks at it and no one understands what it means. Whilst actually you want to have this faster feedback, so a developer can come back to their pipeline, see that maybe they've introduced a security vulnerability, and then fix it, and then run the pipeline again, and then push that further along into production. Amazing. So there are tools that are really great for this. I am a bit biased. I used to work at GitLab, so they have great CI/CD process, and then integrating of not only the scanners I've mentioned, but things like secret detection, code quality, container scanning. There's a whole tool out there. So I'd say probably GitLab is the one that I'm going to recommend the most. But I think in terms of the theory, what we're really trying to do is, with the continuous integration, ensure early detection and remediation of these security vulnerabilities.
Moving on to compliance, this is the one we always sort of a bit grey area, but how does compliance factor into DevSecOps practices, and what are some of the best practices for ensuring compliance?
Sure. So I think this, one of the things is, it's always good to, when I ask this question, I ask the people listening, I'll say, who are you? So for example, what compliance is relevant to you? For example, if you are dealing with medical data, personal card payments, and personal data, you are going to have a lot of different, compliance that affects you. If you are not doing any of those things, and maybe you're in a more, relaxed compliance environment, then maybe you can be more lenient. But I'm a big advisor of best practice, because compliance does exist for a reason. And really with compliance, what we're trying to do is, prevent people from, having security breaches, being hacked, being, or doing nefarious activities. So some of the examples you can do with compliance, and I kind of mentioned it before with this security as code, is you could have policy as code, and you can have examples of, for example, if there is a security vulnerability, we have a range from 0 to 10, where 10 is critical and kind of 1 to 4 is low. So we might say anything over an 8, we're not going to put that into production. Maybe anything over a 9. Maybe we just start with any 10s. Let's not let any 10s in production. So we might have policies, such as that. And really with compliance, we're also trying to be sensible. So some other examples of, compliance areas. I used to work for a company in security training, and it recommended that you train your developers on the OWASP top 10. So those are the 10 most popular vulnerabilities as determined by kind of scientific analysis. So what we're trying to do with compliance is actually make looking forward, make people's lives easier by preventing any mistakes in the future. So some examples of how you can do it is embedding automating testing and monitoring, and that ensures adherence to regulations, because what you're basically saying there is we will automatically scan and monitor everything we have. So if something goes wrong, we will know immediately. And I think monitoring is really, really important, because with the internet age, the AI age, everything moves so fast. So if you are being breached, especially in your cloud networks, the best thing you can do is know immediately, because then you can, whether you close off, that VPC or whatever behavior you act, the faster, the better, because you're closing the windows for nefarious activities. So as well as the automated testing and the monitoring, another thing that's very good is having continuous auditing and logging of all of the, whether it's the security processes or development processes. So that way, if things do go wrong, okay, we've noticed we've been, we've monitored, we've noticed we've been hacked. Okay, let's go to the logs and let's have a look at either what they're doing, what happened immediately before, what we can find out, so that we can prevent it from not happening again. And especially if you are in a conversation where you are having to talk to auditors about your compliance, having a rigorous logging policy will really help you out, because it will show you have visibility of your system. So in terms of the best practices, examples, having regular reviews, having post-incident, reviews where you look at, if something went wrong, how it happens, what happens, and how do we stop it from happening again. And also you can do, well, this could have been worse, this could have been better. So you can get quite creative with it. But I think, regular reviews, having these automated compliance checks. So whether it's the security testing, whether it's the monitoring, logging, etc. And also having documentation to support this. So that way, when the auditors come, you have a clear report of everything you are doing to stay compliant. And if you do that, whether you are the, organization with medical data, card data, and personal data, or whether you're just a startup working in a more lenient place, if you're able to, maintain testing, monitoring, auditing, and logging consistently, you'll be in a really, really strong place, and won't have to deal, hopefully, fingers crossed, with any problems in the future.
And we'll pick up on that, the future, because one of the things I love about this time of year is that we start thinking about making predictions for what's going to happen next year. So in terms of 2025, I'd love to know what future trends you foresee as happening and being important in the DevSecOps landscape, and if you have any that are particularly relevant to software testing.
Cool. It's a great question. And you're right. We get to this time of year and we start to look forward. And I guess my first answer will be a bit boring, because, I'm sure everyone's been saying it for the last 2 years. But I think there will be an increased in the adoption of kind of AI and ML tools for intelligent security automation. So we are starting to see introduction of security within the DevSecOps landscape and within testing. But I think it will become more commonplace. So for example, this year, GitLab recently released 2 really cool things. So one, when you have a vulnerability, you click it, explain the vulnerability. So I, a developer, oh, okay, so that's the line of code that had the cross-site scripting, and that's, this is what I need to change. So that will, make developers more productive and aid their understanding. But also, okay, I know I have a vulnerability, maybe it's with an open source component, so it's just a version change. Using AI, I can create a merge request. And what that will mean is it will have the documentation. Okay, this is a change about for this security vulnerability, changing this library. It will make the change for me. It will show the change of the line of code, the before and the after, and it will do absolutely everything for me. So I, as a person, all I need to do is go and kind of click, submit, or deploy this change. So I think these kind of things are starting to come, more common. But I think we're just kind of at the very beginning, because I think, especially when it comes to security, and for example, when we talk about incident response, being able to close processes to stop nefarious activity, as soon as possible. If we're looking around security testing, so hopefully we're already doing the best practices. We have automated security testing at every stage. I think that will increase. But there's also, for example, if we look a bit outside, we have greater focus on things like zero trust architectures. I mentioned real-time threat detection, and also expansion of the security as code principles across all stages of the development lifecycle.
Brilliant. Love that. I sort of thought you were going to say that, because it's sort of, I mean, anyone that doesn't have AI and ML in there at the moment is going to be, there's not that much else to say. That is great. We've got some real insights today into DevSecOps. So thank you so much. I know I've learned a lot, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great.